Hi students, welcome to the session number 8 for your Android user interface development course. So in the last session we had covered all the elements that can be used in a linear layout and how they are used together to create one particular page form. So we created a login a sign up page form in which we use different views and we use different layouts and we use the elements like margin, padding, and the spacing element also. So that was all done and covered in the last session. So that covered all the elements or all the topics that we could cover in our linear layout. So linear layout is one type of a view group. But if you remember that initially we had told you that there are two types of layouts. So one is the linear layout that we have studied in detail, and the other is the relative layout, which we'll study today. So if we go to our relative layout slide, here you find the definition of a relative layout. So relative layout is a view group that displays child views in relative positions. So you've gone through this definition earlier as well once we were discussing about layouts. So this is the same definition here. So the position of each view can be specified as relative to sibling elements, such as to the such as to the left of or below another view, or in positions relative to the parent relative layout area, such as aligned to the bottom or left or center. So what does this mean? This means basically that the sibling elements can uh, can take uh, can take positions, or we can define positions for the sibling elements corresponding to their parent positioning. So parent positioning, the sibling elements positioning will be relative to the parents positioning. So one more thing that I would like to specify here is that we can give relative positions between the sibling elements as well. So this means that the siblings, that means the smaller views that are there inside the parent view, we can give relative positions to them as well. So this means that there are two types of dependencies. So the two dependencies are one is child to parent and the other is child to child. So we'll cover this concept in an example today so that you understand better how these dependencies work with each other. So here we have another definition for the relative layout. So a relative layout is a very powerful utility for designing a user interface because it can eliminate nested view groups and keep your layout hierarchy flat. So here what it means is that if you remember while creating a screen in the last session, we used linear layouts. So inside a linear layout we used another linear layout. So that is nested view groups. So relative layout eliminates that kind of dependency or that kind of usage of nested view groups and keeps the layout hierarchy flat. The only side effect for the nested view groups is that whenever if such a code is used, like a nested view group code is used to display a screen, then in the actual application, so then the application or that screen loads very slowly. The application might not respond so fast for that screen because of the nested view groups. So that is what is written in this sentence, that if you find yourself using several nested linear layout groups, you may be able to replace them with a single relative layout. So a relative layout will help us in removing the nested linear layout groups. So that was one advantage of using relative layout over the linear layout. So here we have two properties, ID, which we'll discuss in a little while. So we go to our Android Studio. So we can just remove this. I'll remove everything here and I'll just show you how to add a relative layout here. So you need to go into source folder, main, resource and layout. So we need to click here and new and layout resource file. So we can give it any name here. Let's give it a name so that we can remember it. Relative relative layout and test. Okay, so you can close the other tabs that are open and just keep the tab that we've created, relative layout test. So here you see that we created a relative layout, but it is showing a linear layout. So the reason is that it could be possible that while creating this new layout, the root element was not changed to relative layout. So if you see the same issue, then you can go to the new layout resource file and change the root element to relative layout. So if we just do this and we change this name as relative 1 and click OK. So now, so this is your linear layout, and if we go here, this is your relative layout. So we can close this. So we can add our views in this relative layout. For example, if we add an image view, width as wrap content, and height also as wrap content. And to set the image, we can just use source src map folder and IC launcher. So we'll get our image. So in a relative layout, we have a property called align, which aligns the views according to the value of the property that we set. So it's similar to gravity, but it's more easy to work with. So here we can define the property like align. So here we have so many options of align bottom, parent right, end left. So if you look closely, there is a align parent bottom and align bottom. Similarly, align parent right and a right, only right. So the reason is that either you can use a child to parent dependency or a child to child dependency. So if a child to child dependency needs to be used, then we can use only align bottom or align end, align basement. But if a child to parent dependency needs to be used, then we can use align parent bottom or align parent end or align parent left, parent start, parent top, etc. So if I So layout, align parent bottom, and we have two options here, false and true. So if we set it as false, the alignment won't work, but if we set it as true, then the alignment works. Also, if we introduce one more dependency in this view, like align parent right and true, so this view is aligned to the right bottom of the screen. And if we remove the bottom alignment, then the view will be the image will be aligned towards the right top. So that is the reason is that by default, if we don't supply it with the bottom alignment or the bottom property, then the view is always inflated at the top left hand corner, and because of the alignment parent right, the property align parent right, that is why now it is aligned at the right side. So this was about how to align the view towards the top left, top right, bottom left and bottom right. So if we talk about some other alignment properties here, so if we want to align it in the center, so we have center horizontal, center vertical and center in parent. So if we use a center in parent property and make it as true, so the image view moves towards the center of the screen, but aligned towards the right side because the alignment is towards the right side. So if we remove this, if we remove this alignment, so now the image will be exactly at the midpoint of the screen, the center of the screen. And if by chance you don't center it using parent, you center it using horizontal, then it will come in the center, but at the top only. And similarly, if you use the center vertical layout, then it will be in the it will be aligned vertically but in the center. So if we want to move this view or image towards the right side, then we can use the layout align parent right, so that will align it towards the right side. So if we put this view, if we want to put this view at the bottom, so what we can do is, rather than using align right, we can use align parent bottom, and this view will be aligned towards the bottom left of the screen. So if you notice that now we've aligned it at the as a parent bottom, which is this, but we have still kept it as a vertically center aligned. So the reason why it is not center aligned here is because of the align parent bottom property that we've used. So the align parent bottom property will override the vertical center property for aligning the image with align parent bottom property. We need to use some other property here, which will be the center horizontal property. So for aligning the image using the align parent bottom property, we need to use the center horizontal center property to align it in the center of the page. So by using two dependencies like this, you can align the view either center bottom horizontally, or horizontal center vertically at the top, or in between the two sides, here left side and the right side, or from the top left or the top right, or the bottom right or the bottom left section of the screen. So but if you want to use the image right at the center of the screen, without any alignment towards any side, then you can use a single property, which is the center parent property. So having read or studied about the image view and how to use the alignment properties for a view here, we will do an exercise. We'll undertake an exercise in which we will design the layout given below by using the relative layout. So this is your complete screen, the blue one, and the yellow parts are your views, and this is how each view needs to be aligned. So this is your default alignment at the top left, and now for that we don't need to specify any alignment because that is the default alignment. Here we need to define the right alignment, here we need to define a bottom alignment, and here we need to define the right side but bottom alignment. For these views, for this we need to define the center alignment. So let's see how do we proceed in our Android Studio. Let's create the center view here in the Android Studio. So let's remove the properties that are there and let's use the center in parent property here and keep it as true. So this will align your image view right in the center of your parent view. So this is how it will look. So let me just copy this view here and paste it here. Now here if you see that we have added two image views, but we are only able to see one. The reason is that in relative layout the views are aligned on top of one another. So it's like a card deck, like they come on top of the previous view. So here the second view and the first view are aligned on top of each other. The second view is aligned on top of the first view. So that is why you're not able to see the two views separately, which is not the case in a linear layout. In a linear layout, you would have seen the second view below the first view, according to the orientation that we have defined in the linear layout. So just to see this thing better, let's change the view. Instead of an image view, let's define it as a button, and we don't need this here for a button. So what we need is text. So if we just write 1, so that will actually that will put a designation of the first view. So we do the same changes here, like we change it to a button view and we don't need the image, and we add the text property and 2. So if you notice that the here only the 2 text is visible while the first text, the text 1, is not visible, which means that the second view is right on top of the first view. So that is why it is hiding the first view. To see this more clearly, go to the design tab and just click on this and drag it so we can see the first view now. So that means that the second view was on top of the first view. So in context of coding, this means that the view that is on top, the first view that is defined in coding, that will be your that will be your first view, and all the views after it will be on top of the first view. So they will pile up on top of the first view. So we can remove the excess code here that is written. Sorry. And here as well. We can just remove that and this, and need to define the property again here. So if we go back to our exercise screen, so we need to define the views or the view right underneath it. So for doing this, we'll introduce a very important property, which is the identification property. So how we're going to use it is, we're going to define or identify the first button. We need to give the first button an identification property. So here we need to define the ID, which is @+ and this ID here we can define it as 1. So now we need to make a dependency between our first button and a second button. So we want that the second button should align itself underneath the first button. So how to do that? So to do that, we need to add a property called below. So this is the property that we need to define, below. So if you use this below, here you'll find two options, @+id and @id1. So you can choose either one of them, both will work fine. So how to use them? Let's see the definitions that we had left out in our initial slide to understand them better. So this is our slide where we have written the definitions for +id and id. So +id, it is the type of id used when we want to declare the id of a view for its identification. For example, name of the view. So this is the id. +id is used for identifying the view itself. So that is when we use the +id property. And id, if we want to make a view dependent on the other view in the hierarchy, so to implement this we have to use @id as a reference of other view to declare dependency. So @id, the id property is used when we need to make a view dependent on some other view and in the hierarchy. So in this case, in our case, we are making button 2 dependent on button 1. So in button 2 we can use id property, but in button 1 we cannot use id property because we need to define identification for button 1. So that is why for button 1 we need to use the +id property. So let's see this in example here. So right now we have used id, so here we can use id. So because we have defined id 1 in for button 1, we can just use the id property or the id value here and define it as and relate it to 1 so that it gets attached or it is dependent on button with id 1. So basically the +id is used to declare an identification for a view or a button, and simple id is basically to use that declaration for the dependent view. So if we notice here, the button 2 is now underneath button 1. It is no longer piled up on top of button 1. It is now underneath button 1. So let's see what would happen if button 1 had been below button 2. So this is actually a very wrong way of supplying or identifying the buttons or the views, because whatever the view needs to be identified, or the identification value needs to be set for the view, that should come on top. The reason is that the code, when it starts to read the software and it starts to read the code, it reads from the top. So once it reads from the top, it does not find the identification here for the button that we are using the dependency with. Then it can throw an error while using the application. So that can happen in some cases. So that is why we should always make sure that the the view that is being declared needs to be on top, and the views that are dependent on that view, they come underneath. The code comes underneath that view code. So we can change this back to the top here. So this is the code. This is how it should be. So this was about how to declare or identify a view and how to use that identification and make a dependency between two views. So let's see our view here. Now we want to define the third view. So let's keep this view as the third view here, this box. So how to define the view here? For that we can use a button and wrap content, width, height also as wrap content, and define text as 3. So a button is created by default at the top left of the screen. So this third button needs to be on the right of the first button. So for defining that, we need to use a property which is to right off. So we have to right off, to left off, to end off, start off. So we need to use the to right off property here. And here again, the definition, we need to use the identification that we have defined for the first view. So this brings the third button to the right of the first button, but as you can see, this is not where we want it. We want it here, right next to the first button. So to do that, we need to add another property here, which is center vertical. So we need to bring it to the center vertically, and the value is true. So this is how we can align the third button right next to the first button. So here, this is the fourth button that we'll define in our view. So if we go to our Android Studio and define another button and wrap content and height also wrap content, and the text that can be used is 4 to identify its button number 4. And now the important part is how to align it with the first button. So earlier for the third button we used to the right of. For this we can use to the left of the first button. So this will bring it to the left of the first button, but it needs to be aligned vertically also in the center. So center vertical property needs to be supplied with. So this is how we can define the button to the left of and to the right of another view. So now we need the only view that is left in the center area is the view that is on top of the first button. So let's see how we can define it here as well. So let's take a button view. Sorry, we need to use the capitals here. The button view, and wrap content, and height also wrap content, and text property as 5, and so suppose we want to keep it on top of the first button. So for that we can use a property which is above, and here we can supply it with the reference to the view on which we want to keep it above for. So here it is, we need to keep it above the first view, and now we need to align it in the center. So to align it in the center, we can use the center horizontal, because we need to align it horizontally, and true. So this is how we can define the 4-5 views around the first view, and using the first view we can define the positioning of the rest of the views. So now if we compare it to our exercise screen, we have completed the center portion of it. So now we are left with the 4 buttons on the corners: top left, top right, bottom right, and bottom left. So let's start off with the bottom right button. So let's take a button view here, wrap content, and text as 6. So this will be the 6th button. So to bring it to the bottom right of the screen, we can use align parent right and true. So this will take it to the right side of the screen but at the top, and to bring it to the bottom we can use align parent bottom and true, which will bring it to the bottom right of the screen. So now let's define this button as the 7th button and try to align it at the bottom left. So again we will define a button and wrap content, and text will be 7, and this needs to be aligned at the bottom. So we can use align parent bottom true. So it will come to the bottom left of the screen. So let's set the next button, which is the top right button, which will come here on the screen. So wrap content and text. Oh, sorry. So just text property, and this will be button number 8, I guess. Yeah, it will be button number 8, and align parent right, which will be true. So that will align the button towards the top right of the screen. So we are just left with one more alignment. So that will be our last button here. It will be wrap content, and the text will be 9, and we don't need to define any alignment properties here, because by default the alignment for the button or any view is top and left. So it is already at the top left, so we don't need to define the alignment property here. So this completes our exercise screen that we showed you in the slide. So this is our exercise screen. So we've managed to recreate that using our relative layout. And so today we've studied all about basics of relative layout, how to define a relative layout, what is the meaning of ID and plus ID while using the dependency inside the views using relative layout. So there are two types of dependencies, like one is a child to parent and a child to child dependency. So this that we defined here, so that is basically the child to child dependency because it's between two views. So having seen an example of how to use a relative layout, we'll design a proper screen in our next exercise in our next session. So hopefully you'll get a better idea of how to use relative layout in a live example. So that will give you a better understanding of the application of relative layout. So if you want to go through the material, we have a study material for this session. So along with the video, there is a study material. You can go through the study material. You can go through an example also, and you can have a better understanding. You can practice at your own end to understand this better. So if you have any questions, doubts, or any queries, you can just write into us. So hopefully see you in the next video. Thank you.